I was looking at our mailbag recently and found some strong criticism of Measure 110 from you, our viewers. If you don't remember, Measure 110 decriminalized pretty much every illegal drug 2 years ago. The plan was to use money from the state's marijuana tax to create treatment options. Kai wrote in to say it must be repealed. The country's biggest mental institution will have to be built to deal with the after effects of just 2 years of this social experiment, bearing the flag of compassion, harm reduction, access to treatment, saving lives, and of course, saving taxpayers' money. It's such a humanitarian disaster, he wrote. Bob added, allowing possession and consumption of street drugs with no consequences or plan will only create more mystery and death. I think he means misery there. And Jim wrote in to say, it's all unicorns and magic fairy dust. Measure 110 needs to be repealed and revamped and reintroduced with treatment tied to accountability. Now, that last comment really struck a chord because it sounds similar to what an expert in the prevention and treatment of addiction told Oregon lawmakers recently, that the state's drug policy encourages extensive drug use and has really no deterrent. Keith Humphreys did not say voters should overturn Measure 110, but he did say the state could make changes to slow the growth in the number of addicts in Oregon.
Addicted people usually do not seek treatment and recovery without external pressure from family, friends, employers, healthcare providers, or the law. Why does this matter? It matters because Oregon has removed all legal pressure to stop drug use and seek treatment. Because many addicted people are not working or in touch with their family, those pressures to stop using drugs and alcohol are also absent from their lives.
By the way, the legislature controls that feed, and so you're going to see him in a box throughout this story. Humphreys founded and co-directs the Stanford Network on Addiction Policy. He also serves as a member of the White House Commission on Drug-Free Communities, or did under President Bush, and he was also a senior policy advisor at the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy under President Obama. He laid out Oregon's situation in stark terms.
Because the West Coast has an individualistic culture with significant tolerance for substance use, social pressures to seek treatment are also often minimal. So on the one hand, we have highly rewarding drugs which are widely available. On the other hand, little or no pressure to stop using them. Under those conditions, we should expect to see exactly what Oregon is experiencing: extensive drug use, extensive addiction, and not much treatment seeking.
Now, Measure 110 does allow police to write tickets for $100 if someone is found in possession of those user amounts of drugs, and they can have the ticket wiped away if they call the Lines for Life helpline. Most who are given the ticket, though, they just ignore them. They think they're a joke, according to Dr. Ted Kohortis, who's the head of addiction medicine for OHSU.
The original plan to ticket people who use drugs and have them call a treatment hotline has not worked. Of over 3,000 tickets issued as of the end of this summer, the hotline received 137 calls for treatment, most of whom weren't looking for treatment, actually. They were looking for screening for legal purposes. Only 1% of those issued a ticket for drug possession requested information about treatment resources. In my discussions with treatment leaders around the state, not one has had any patient enroll in treatment due to these tickets.
So there's that. It's definitely not working. Humphreys from Stanford talked about Portugal, which decriminalized user amounts of drugs long before Oregon.
Now, it's worth noting that Portugal, which is often cited as the inspiration for Oregon's drug policy, places heavy social and legal pressure on addicted people to seek treatment. The open use and flagrant drug dealing that we see in West Coast cities in this country are virtually absent in Portugal, which shuts them down and uses court pressure to get people into treatment. I've spent a lot of time in Portugal, and I know the people who designed their policy, so please take it from me. Oregon is not following Portugal's example and will not get its results.
So that's not very encouraging, is it? But if we look around many of our neighborhoods, especially in the greater Portland area, you can see what he's talking about. Humphreys also talked about harm reduction, not stopping drug use, but making it safer. He said it's a fine approach as long as it's not the only approach.
Evidence-based harm reduction can save lives, but it can't do it alone. Making the opioid overdose rescue drug naloxone more available, for example, translates into a smaller proportion of overdoses resulting in death or disability. But harm reduction is not harm elimination. People who use drugs will still suffer. So please combine in your mind that reality with another important fact. Reducing the harm of drug use will never reduce the size of the addicted population. That is the role of addiction treatment and recovery in the short term and prevention in the long term. If Oregon continues on its current path of not complementing effective harm reduction with strong prevention and treatment initiatives, and of focusing harm reduction only on people who use drugs, it should expect rising drug use, addiction, and harms to communities.
So that's what the experts have to say. And I'm definitely not an expert, but I do have an opinion, and here it is. When I voted for Measure 110, which decriminalized small amounts of drugs, I think I felt like a lot of people who believe addiction is a medical and psychological issue, and probably not something that has the consequence of being put in jail. You shouldn't put people in jail for using drugs if that's all they're doing. But I also wrongly, it turns out, thought there would be some sort of penalty, some sort of pressure to get addicts into treatment and off the drugs. After all, the title of the measure was Drug Addiction Treatment and Recovery Act. But that's not how it's played out at all. Yes, more than $300 million of marijuana tax money was sent to Measure 110 programs aimed at drug users. The money took 2 years to get out, but it's there now, and it's going to fund programs with services like outreach and peer mentorship and needle exchanges and recovery housing. And that's all great, but none of those programs specifically focuses on stopping addiction. They're focused on making it less painful. Now, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out the results. But maybe it did take an MD from OHSU and a PhD from Stanford to explain it to lawmakers and to the rest of us. As I mentioned at the top, many of you have emailed or called to share your feelings that Measure 110 should be repealed. I'm sure there are more than a few of you out there as well who think that it should just be left alone and given more time to work. I personally have not decided if 110 needs to be overturned. I still do like the idea of helping to get people off drugs, not punish them. But it's clear the law needs both the stick and the carrot, if you will. If there's no incentive at all to change behavior, the behavior is not going to change. If we're going to keep running our first-in-the-nation experiment with decriminalizing drugs, we need to quickly pair that with consequences that will give addicts a reason to get treatment and programs aimed at stopping drug use in the first place. There's an old saying that goes, if you keep doing what you've always done, you're going to keep getting what you always got. That's not a good thing when it comes to Measure 110. In my opinion, it is time for a change. But that's just my opinion. What do you think? You don't have to agree with me, although I think you should. But I could be full of it. I'd love to hear what you have to say. Send me an email. The address is thestory@kgw.com or call and leave a voicemail, 503-226-5090. I look forward to hearing from you.